You are a white Swiftie who thinks Beyoncé isn't relatable. Is that problematic? Let's talk about it. By the way, I'm KJ Miller. I am a founder, lecturer, and content creator. I love talking about all things pop culture and business, particularly when those two things intertwine. If you like any of that, be sure to subscribe. Now let's get into it. So first of all, what brought us here today? Well, as I explained in my TikTok video that I posted yesterday, there's a conversation happening right now over on TikTok about a white creator named Brittany Lee, who has been discovering Beyonce's music and discovering how much she likes Beyonce's music. And while on that journey and sort of posting about that journey, she mentioned that she had been judging a book by its cover and that Beyonce was more relatable than she had realized. And things like that, basically saying like, oh, wow, I didn't know I would like Beyonce. I kind of thought I wouldn't like her. Turns out she's amazing. Then another creator, HB from KC, hopped online and said, that's a microaggression. It's a microaggression for you to say you judged a book by its cover. And went back and forth with her, I guess, in the comments. I didn't get too deep into like their back and forth. It's just I saw the original video from Brittany Lee about this journey she's on, and I saw the response video from HB from KC. If more has gone on behind the scenes, I haven't seen all of that, but I made my video giving my response, and you can go and watch the whole thing. It's almost 7 minutes long. So, watch it in 2x if you'd like. But I wanted to bring the conversation over here on YouTube because there were a few things that I didn't get a chance to really touch on over there that I think are better suited for a longer format. Now, to quickly bring you up to speed on my take over there, essentially the headline is, I would like to widen the tent of people who enjoy Beyonce's music, particularly the tent of Swifties who enjoy Beyonce's music. Just as I'm a lifelong Beehive member who got into Taylor, I think there are probably some lifelong Swifties who would love Beyonce if they gave her a real chance. So that's my just starting perspective. From there, what I said is, to me, it seemed like Brittany was genuinely trying to do that and was approaching the conversation in good faith. Whether she said everything right or not, or whether she did have some biases she needed to unpack, and I think we all do, all of that might be true. It doesn't change the fact that for me, she's going on a journey that I'm excited for her to be going on, and I'd like to try and meet that journey with grace, the same way I feel like my journey into discovering Taylor's music was met with grace by the Swiftie community. Okay, and I go into a bit more detail again if you want to watch the full video. But what I want to talk about here is the idea specifically that there are so many people who find Beyonce quote unquote unrelatable, because I do think there's a lot for us to unpack there. So let's talk about why people say Beyonce isn't relatable. In my opinion, there are the reasons people outwardly cite, and there are the reasons sort of lying beneath the surface that are probably a bit more true. So let's start with some of the reasons people often cite. I actually hear a lot, and I hear this from Swifties a lot, that Beyonce just sort of has this almost like perfection to her, right? Like she's so beautiful. She's so talented. She's just kind of like otherworldly in her level of talent that feels like, oh, I can't relate to that. And they will sometimes compare that to Taylor, who, gives more girl next door energy, more like, obviously she's incredibly talented, but also it doesn't feel like talent that's so far off and away from us in some way. And I will say, I think I've also played into that narrative a little bit. I made a video a long time ago basically saying Beyonce seems more like your big sister and Taylor seems more like your best friend. And I do think some of that energy is in the like how relatable both of them seem piece. And so I will admit that I probably have played into that narrative as well. However, I think if we stop the narrative there, we actually do a disservice to both of these women. First of all, Taylor is unbelievably talented, right? She might seem more relatable, but I don't think very many of us could do what she does. I don't think any of us could have written Tortured Poets Department and Folklore and Evermore and Midnights in the span of like 4 years. I don't think any of us could have been on tour for 2 years doing different surprise songs every single night. The girl is as relatable as she might seem. we actually can't relate. Okay, so I think pushing that piece of the narrative does a bit of a disservice to Taylor. And I also think pushing the other piece of it too hard for Beyonce does a disservice to her, because we all know about the trope of the strong Black woman. And so often Black women are held up as being so strong that people don't see us as people. We literally, when we are in pain and at the doctors assume we don't experience pain the same way. And I can talk about this firsthand. I got a C-section, which is major abdominal surgery, and had to fight to be given real painkillers. I don't know, maybe they thought that I was going to abuse the actual painkillers, so they were giving me ibuprofen after surgery. Okay, so I literally had to fight and talk to multiple levels of people at the hospital staff. So it does a disservice, I think, to Beyonce as well, in that this idea that she's so perfect, I think, robs her of her humanity. And I think if we lean too hard on this idea of Taylor being relatable, it downplays just how impressive her accomplishments and her talent is, right? So while I do understand that narrative, and I have, as I said, done at least some of my own playing into it, I don't think we should stop the conversation there. And I don't think it fully explains why some people say Beyonce isn't relatable. The other thing that I will often see people cite, and again, sometimes see Swifties cite, when they say they felt like Beyonce maybe wasn't as relatable, is the subject matter of their music. And again, to me, I feel like I kind of got to call bullshit on that, because let's look at what Beyonce actually talks about in her songs, okay? And we don't even have to look at her whole discography. We can just look at Cowboy Carter. Okay, she sings about the essentially unfulfilled promise of America as a country. And I get that that is a heavy topic, but it should not be an unrelatable topic to you, particularly if you are American or if you have ever been in any way let down by the promise of your country being unfulfilled. And I'm thinking a lot of people outside of America could probably relate to that too. But specifically for us here in America, if you're a woman, we had our right to choose stripped from us 2 years ago. That didn't make you feel a little bit less patriotic when that was stolen away from you? If you are a queer person in this country, there are people sitting in Congress right now working hard to try and strip away your rights to marriage, your rights to serve in the military. That doesn't make you think about how this country hasn't lived up to its potential. Like, we have all watched over the last several weeks as people celebrated over the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. And the reason there was so much angst around that is because so many of us have experienced the failure of our healthcare system. So I would venture to say, though it might be a bit heavier of a topic, it certainly isn't not relatable, unless you just have the perfect life, which means you are a cis, straight, rich, white man. If you're anybody else, my guess is this country probably hasn't lived up to its full potential for you, and that should be relatable. And by the way, when she sings about it, she still sings about it in her voice, which is amazing and gives us amazing beats and amazing soundscapes. So it might be heavy, but it's still enjoyable to listen to. And it for damn sure is relatable. What else does she talk about on this album? She has a song called Protector. It's one of my favorite songs on the album. That's literally about being the protector of your children. If you are a parent, that's as universal as it gets. Wanting to protect your children at all costs. That's like, I don't know how to describe that any other way but relatable if you're a parent. And even if you aren't a parent, assuming you have a parent, you could probably relate a little bit. She talks on this album about her relationship. She talks about protecting her relationship from all of these women's and ne'er-do-wells who are trying to interfere. And regardless of how you feel about Jay-Z, again, to me, that is relatable. I for sure can relate because I am someone who does not play about my man. And I know there are a lot of women who feel the same way and a lot of men who feel the same way. So again, is it that it's not relatable? Is it the subject matter? I have to call bullshit on that because I think a lot of these themes that she's singing about are universal. Also, if we're going to talk about how universal Taylor's music is, and I do believe she has a gift for writing about very specific things and making them feel more universal, I think that really is her superpower. But the reality is, some of the things she is talking about in her songs are incredibly specific. My Tears Ricochet, which is one of my favorite songs of all time, what we believe is that that is a song about her relationship with her former record label. Now, how many of you have a relationship, any kind of relationship with a record label, much less a former relationship? How many of you have experienced betrayal at the hands of your former record label? None of you, okay? And yet that song, because it deals with universal themes of betrayal and heartbreak, cuts to the bone for so many of us. But we give her the space to do that. We say to Taylor, when you're writing these very specific lyrics, we can take them and apply them to our lives, even if we haven't experienced that exact situation. So why are we not willing to afford that same grace to Beyoncé? And this is where the conversation has to get a little uncomfortable, okay? Not for me. It's not uncomfortable for me to talk about these things, but I can understand that it's uncomfortable for some people. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, there is a racial element to why so many people, white Swifties, think of Beyoncé as not being relatable. I do think there's a racial element there. And by the way, I don't think that makes somebody a bad person. I think we all have biases. We all come into situations with, prejudgments. And I'm not saying this is true of every single white person or white Swiftie who dislikes Beyoncé. I'm not making an all Swifties sort of comment, okay? So if you're going to hop in my comments to defend yourself and say, not all Swifties feel this way, please keep it. Please keep it. I'm not saying this is true of all Swifties, nor all Swifties who dislike Beyoncé. What I am saying is I do think that there is a racial element here, and that doesn't make you a bad person. I think it's perfectly okay to admit that bias and to sort of try and unpack it and to ask yourself, okay, let's say KJ's right. What could I do differently if I just let go of my preconceived notions about Beyoncé? What might I do differently? Might I sit down and give Cowboy Carter a fresh listen without thinking to myself, it's not for me? Might I go and watch Homecoming on Netflix because it is, in my opinion, the greatest live performance any artist has ever given that we've ever had the opportunity to watch with our own two eyes? Might I give something that highly rated a chance? Might I go and listen to one of her older albums? She's on her 8th full studio album, and that's to say nothing of The Gift from Lion King and the duo album she did with her husband. She's got a lot of albums to choose from. If you weren't coming to it with preconceived notions, what might you do differently? And that, I think, to tie us all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, is where I felt like Brittany Lee was starting her journey. She was essentially saying, what if I just gave Beyoncé another chance? What if I put whatever my preconceived notions were to the side, whether they were racial or not? And I don't know that she would say that. What she has said in my comment section is when she said judged a book by its cover, she really meant more referring to Beyonce's singles. And I hear that. I think that is part of judging a book by its cover when it comes to artists. You're going to judge them by the songs you've heard the most of. And if those songs didn't resonate with you, you might not be inspired to dive more deeply into their catalog. I do understand that. I don't think that in and of itself means, even if that's true, I don't think that means there couldn't be anything else going on. And in her case, assuming there was, or even if there wasn't, the fact that she said, let me put that to the side and just start over. Just give it another look. Give it another listen. Why not? What do I have to lose? Much the same way I did when I rented Eras Tour movie and said, what do I have to lose? Everybody's talking about it. I don't want to be left out of the pop culture moment. Let me just watch and see. I had nothing to lose. I think if you're willing to accept, maybe I am coming to this with some preconceived notions based in some biases, some of which might be based on her music and the content and whatever, some of which might be based on my unwillingness to see a Black woman operating at her level as someone who can be relatable to me. maybe I can put that to the side for a moment and just give the music another chance. And I guess ultimately, the reason I wanted to have a longer format for this conversation is because my goal, as I said at the beginning, is to expand the tent of people who listen to and enjoy Beyoncé. And some people might say, why do you even care about that? Because the reality is, it doesn't matter if one more person listens to Beyoncé or if one more person purchases a ticket to her concert. She's fine, her family's fine, her children's children are fine in terms of wealth and opportunity. So it's not about me wanting to continue to enrich the Knowles Carter family. It's about the fact that I have found this music to be so uplifting, so fulfilling to my life that I like sharing that with other people. I quite simply, I do enjoy that. And I also think because Beyoncé does the work in her music of approaching some of these heavier topics that spring these important conversations, I am all for a landscape where more of us are more comfortable having these conversations, because as difficult as they might seem, I think we are better off when we have them and when we try to meet each other in the middle or meet each other where we are in order to have them. And I actually think she does play a role in making those conversations easier to have. Some people might disagree with that. Some people might say she's just another pop star, whatever. I don't think that. I think she is helping to not only push music forward, but helping to push conversations forward, conversations about race, conversations about class consciousness, conversations about how players within the music industry move and treat one another and make space for one another. And I think all of these things are important, and I have a lot of respect for her as an artist for pushing those conversations forward. So when there are more people who are becoming a part of this beehive community, that's more people participating in the conversations. And I like that. And that is why I said in my original TikTok video, I didn't want to cut anyone down right at the moment that they were starting to enter that tent. I didn't want to cut someone down and say, but the way you're approaching this, or like that thing you just said about Beyoncé is rooted in white supremacy. Because though it may be, to me, to just stop the conversation right there stops everything dead in its tracks, right? Like if we're going to have that conversation, I think it needs to be a conversation starter, which is what I've tried to do in this video. If the conversation starter is, look, you might have some implicit biases, some racial undertones to why you think Beyoncé is not relatable. So let's start over. Let's peel back. Let's set those preconceived notions on the table and put on Beachella, right? Like, to me, if it's a conversation stopper, it just doesn't do much. If it's a conversation starter and we're saying, all right, yeah, I've got some biases. Yeah, you know what? I may have afforded her more grace, or the subject matter of her songs more grace, if she were singing them in a different body and a different skin tone. That might be true. That doesn't make me a terrible person. That makes me a person with bias, which is literally all people. So yeah, maybe I do want to try and approach this a little bit differently. If it's a conversation starter, then I think we're all better off for that. Or at least, that's just what I think. Who knows if I'm right or wrong? It's just what I think. Anyway, I want to know what you think. What are your thoughts about this conversation? What are your thoughts about Beyoncé being relatable, not relatable? Have you been on a Beyoncé discovery journey in the last year or so? If you have, I want to know. And if you would like to be on, please know I do have a playlist called Beyoncé for Swifties over on TikTok. I suggest you check it out. If you like this sort of content, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.